to go with these colorful, eye-popping pictures. The Decade That Rocked, a new book by rock photographer Mark Weiss, is available for purchase now. Go to thedecadethatrocked.com, where there are exclusive bundles available with extra prints, t-shirts, and even patches. Inquire about the Van Halen bundle, especially made for Dave and Dave Unchained listeners. Order today. The Decade That Rocked. It'll rock your world.
Need a laugh? Check out the Funny How Comedy Podcast, which focuses on upbeat conversations with legendary comedians. It's free on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out on Facebook at Funny How Comedy Podcast, on Twitter at Funny How Podcast, on Instagram at Funny How Comedy Podcast, or email us at funnyhowcomedypodcast@gmail.com.
Are you a guitar enthusiast? Want to learn all the tricks and licks of the trade? Searching for that Eddie Van Halen sound and speed? Want to play in the style of Alex Lifeson of Rush, Mick Mars of Motley Crue, or Brian May of Queen? Then sign up for Zoom lessons from the best, Lance Turner, the guitarist for the #1 Van Halen tribute band, the Atomic Punks. Lance will take you on as his personal student in the comfort of your own home on Zoom. To sign up, contact Lance via email at lancetLessons@gmail.com. Lessons are at an affordable rate of $40 an hour. Email Lance today at lancetLessons@gmail.com. That's LANCETLESSONS@gmail.com. And learn how to jam like a star.
There's always a certain amount of friction in a band. If you have 4 members and they all like the identical thing, you're going to have no versatility. You know what I mean? It's like I listened to more progressive music when I did. Alex liked straight ahead rock and roll. Dave was into disco. You know, and together, you know, it made a soup. You know, and what came out of it, you know, it didn't really affect the music, you know, but harmony-wise, song structure, things like that, you know. There were a lot of elements of a lot of things that we all grew up on.
All right, Dave, you know what time it is.
Well, my buddy Dave, he don't want me around. He says he's tired of watching me let him down. He just wants a good mailbag. He wants only the best. But he hates disappointment better than all the rest. And he says that he thinks that I'm headed for a whole lot of trouble. Well, he thinks that I'm headed for a whole lot of trouble. Well, he thinks that I'm headed for a whole lot of trouble if I don't nail the mailbag intro.
That's right, it's mailbag time again. And we got a tight 15 here, Dave. We're going to get right to it. Letter number 1 comes from Tim O'Brien from Brooklyn, New York. And he says, I wrote to your podcast in the past about listening to Van Halen 3 in the fall of 2020 and hearing what ye had to say regarding the album and how it seemed quite poignant to hear it only after Eddie passed. I said I was not a fan of Van Hagar, and you suggested I take a deep dive into the work Van Halen did post-Dave, and I have. You're right, there is some good work in there, but yes, there is a lot of Sammy vibe in there too, and I'm not really a fan of his lyrics, so I tried to just clue into the music. First, I must start by saying my appreciation of David Lee Roth as a lyricist grew immensely. But why did Eddie want to take his turn into more melodic writing? Why take his ground-shifting guitar work and reduce it and remove the danger from it? Thinking back to the mid-late 80s, the inspiration that Eddie and Van Halen had on other bands really started to bloom. Everybody was doing inspired versions of Van Halen. Frontman preened like David Lee Roth, and almost all lead guitarists were playing up the neck and doing blindly fast work like Eddie. Motley Crue was trying to be fun and dangerous. Def Leppard was doing big rock, and Ozzy, Rat, Quiet Riot, and others had their Van Halen-style guitarists. In the face of that, I now think Eddie had no choice but to go in a different direction and stay both inspired and move away from the clones. When Dave debuted with Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan, he countered with melody and harmony. I'm happy to have that great early work of the original lineup, but also to hear the later Eddie Van Halen pushing himself as an artist to be in his own lane. It makes listening to it more enjoyable, and a visual artist myself, inspirational. Thanks for the podcast, and I know how much work podcasts are, and you produce an amazing resource for Van Halen fans. Tim O'Brien from Brooklyn. P.S. Alex and Wolf should hire Brian Kehoe to bake the tapes and work with the Vault at 5150. Release an official Warner demo box set. All right, Tim. Well, I want to say, hey, man, thanks so much for writing, and your well-written letter is very cool and very to the point. I will point to something Wolf said about Eddie's writing was changing. The shift was with Van Hagar, and then another shift with Van Halen 3. I think Sam made Ed's work into more commercially viable songs, and Gary did not, simply because Gary himself likes the more eclectic vibe. If you see the Tribe of Judah album and the podcast we did a couple of months ago, that explains that. Ed wanted to experiment, and Gary was totally down to do so. Al went along with it, and Mike was not involved. So that was the situation there. The fans gave Ed a hard no on that, and I think that really broke his heart. And I remember what Wolf said about A Different Kind of Truth, how he tapped into the old leftover demos to get Ed back into the old school Van Halen mindset that he had left behind many years ago. Regarding Brian Kehoe, I think he would be perfect person for Wolf and Alex to hire. I'm in full agreement on that. What about you, Dave?
Brian Q is the man. Didn't he already do one for the first Van Halen album, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. It's sitting on a shelf somewhere. I don't quite understand what the situation is there. The rumor is that Eddie Trunk said it, and I believe Eddie because he's a straight shooter. He said he literally saw the box set. When he said saw the box set, like he's talking about the tracks. He's not looking at the actual physical box set. But he was played tracks from it, like almost like if someone was pulling up their iTunes and said, hey, look at this, and played him some stuff. And he says, this is all done. We did this whole thing. And apparently it was a box set that was sort of centered around the debut album, and it was like outtakes. There was like cuts with like Ted talking to Ed, Ted talking to Dave, do it this way, do it that way, and them responding to him. And he said it was really, really cool stuff. And he said it was heartbreaking to hear, knowing that it wasn't going to be released. But
why Ed abandoned that style of music? I mean, he was following his muse. That's just what he wanted to do.
Yeah, that's what he wanted to do, for sure. Letter number 2 comes from Nikki, who she said is chick, not a dude. So we're dealing with a female here, which is rare for us. Hi, Dave and Dave. Do you have any feedback on Van Halen Tribute featuring Tyler Morris? They are playing the Wolf Den at Mohegan Sun on Saturday, August 28th. I plan to go, but I'm wondering what to expect. I'm not familiar with Tyler Morris. Thank you, Nikki. Chick, not a dude. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for listening. It's always great to have a female listener. It's a rarity. Tyler Moritz is an excellent player. I'd like to actually get him on the Cats. He's a young man who runs this Van Halen tribute called like Van Halen Tribute featuring Tyler Morris, and he is an Eddie Van Halen fanatic. So he plays on a Frankenstein guitar, and he plays just like Eddie, and it's a tribute. I have to say, it's a little less traditional than the regular Van Halen tribute because of his singer. His singer is more of a straight-ahead rock singer. He doesn't really have the Roth flair, or it doesn't really come over that way. But I always suggest that anybody, if you're curious about any of these Van Halen tributes, go on YouTube and catch a clip before you go if you want to check it out and get a feel for it and see what you're getting into before going to see. It's always best to do that. I know Tyler is an excellent player, so you're not going to be disappointed there. What about you, Dave?
Unfortunately, I can't go this weekend.
Right.
Because Mohegan Sun is not far from me at all.
Most of your life savings goes there.
So write us back, Nikki, and let us know what you thought.
Letter number 3 comes from knee-sliding, scissor-kicking Fred from Toronto, Canada. He says he's talking about the Van Hagar other half Instagram. So he's not happy with this. He's pissing him off. And he says, the baloney of referring to this era of the band as Van Hagar has got to stop once and for all. This does nothing but taint and defile the brand and the legacy. It is disrespectful to the Van Halen name. I am of the opinion that when you say Van Halen, it is implied without afterthought that Roth is fronting. Van Halen with Sammy on vocals is just that. It's not Van Hagar. Sammy is quoted on record as saying he would have been embarrassed if the band changed their name to Van Hagar, as the record label was suggesting back in 1985. He said that it was Eddie who put the kibosh on that. He also said Sammy is trying to rewrite history, divide fans, and legitimize a version of the band through a name that never existed in the first place. It is plain wrong, unprofessional, and this crosses a dangerous line. I can't thank this podcast enough for all you guys do for us fans, for delivering such high-quality, top-shelf, red carpet content month after month is astonishing. Knee sliding, scissor kicking Fred from 60 minutes outside of Toronto, Canada. Well, Fred, you might be pissed off at me right now because I'm kind of disagreeing with you here. Although I want to say you have absolutely every right to feel the way you feel. That's fine. I totally understand where you're coming from. But personally, I think Sam and Mike have every right to curate this era of the band. I call Van Halen with Sammy Van Hagar. It's Van Halen to me from, I guess, late 72 all the way up to 1984. And then it is certainly Van Hagar from 86 to 96. And then, I guess, I don't know, the Gary era is, I just keep calling the Gary era Van Halen 3 or Van Halen Mach 3, and then reunions of the reunions. So my reason for doing this is that the band really took a completely different direction. I don't share your view, and that's okay, but Van Halen with Sammy on vocals, you can't just call it, well, that's Van Halen with just Sammy on vocals, because Sam was a huge part of that music. And when Sammy came into the band, he didn't treat it like Van Halen. He didn't curate the catalog at all. He was dousing the catalog. Sammy coming into Van Halen in 1986, he really wanted and made a very strong point of putting all of that in the past. He reluctantly played Panama and Ain't Talking About Love on the 5150 tour. I mean, who is going to pull that off? I don't know anybody who would have walked into a band, taken the lead singer position, and completely refused to do the catalog and said, oh, if you're going to do 2 Van Halen songs, we're going to do 2 Sammy Hagar songs to balance that out. And you know what? We're going to do the whole new album with the exception of Inside. And then if we're going to fill it out, we'll do solos and covers. So that's why I say you can't really call that Van Halen. I think there's an issue there. Now, I think he did create a whole new version of the band with Ed. I think from 5150 straight through to Balance, that is definitely Van Hagar. And I use that term, and I'm sorry if that offends you. I use that term mainly to just label it, like Dave said. Like, if you say Van Hagar, people know what that means. It means the Sammy era of the band. So now, they're the only ones, and I think Dave said this in the news, they're the only ones, Sam and Mike, who are curating this band's legacy. Alex is doing nothing. Dave is doing nothing. Ed is gone. Gary's back in Extreme. Who's left but Sam and Mike? And you know what? They're out there touring. They're out there putting Van Halen songs in the set list. And I enjoy this Instagram that they're doing. It's a way to them to connect with the fans. They have humor, sense of humor. They poke fun at themselves and give you a little insight and backstage stuff and this and that. They're not bashing Ed or bashing Alex or even bashing Dave with it. So I think it's just nice that somebody's doing something for this band. Now, if you don't like that era of the band, that's fine. But listen, you don't have to see it all one way. And it's proof that Van Halen with Sammy wasn't considered Van Halen because when Dave was back in the band, they didn't play any Sammy Hagar era songs. So it's very clearly defined. You know what I mean? It's not like Dave was out there singing Finish What You Started or, Best of Both Worlds. That catalog was completely wiped out of the set list. So what do you make of this, Dave?
People get too hung up on what they call the band, especially after the fact. I don't care if you call it Swiss cheese with a side of gravy. Call it whatever you want. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter. Like, it is what it is. Yes, it's Van Halen, the band. Sammy wants to call it Van Hagar. Man, he can knock his socks off. Hats off to you. We could go on philosophizing forever about, was it one band? Was it two separate bands? Should they have not? I mean, we could do a whole episode on that, quite frankly. At the end of the day, that kind of stuff, it's almost like a what if. It doesn't really matter to me. So I hear what you're saying. I understand the whole respect.